Hello, welcome to Entertainment Extra with Joe Crawford here on RemicTV.com. Hopefully you're enjoying all the shows we have to offer here. I know you're watching the shows out there on Remic TV, but we want you to sign up. So please, it's free, it's very easy to do, and if you're the 88th person to sign up, boom, you get this Remic TV mug just like that. Now, if you refer your friends and they sign up, you can win $500 at the end of the month, and we'll pull out a name, and hopefully you'll be that winner. So just don't watch the videos. Sign up too and be a part of RemicTV.com. We have a great show for you here on Entertainment Extra. I'm honored to have this guest on. He's an author, a speaker, a consultant. He has his new book that we are going to be talking about called Fundamentally Different. David Friedman joins me via Skype. Good day, sir. How are you?
Fantastic, Joe. Great to talk to you.
Very good. Thank you. I'm glad you came on the show here. Now, you have decided to write this book, Fundamentally Different. Now, before we get into that, first of all, let's talk about a little bit what you do. You're an author, speaker, consultant. What do you talk about?
All of my work, Joe, is helping companies working around the issues of organizational values and culture. One of the things I've discovered in my business career is that, believe it or not, the single most significant factor that leads to business success is an organization's culture, and yet so many leaders miss that. And so all of my work is helping companies really develop high-performance teams by using their organizational culture and values.
Now, what is organization culture that you're discussing here?
Well, the definition that I use, Joe, for organizational culture is the commonly held set of values and principles, so it's the things that people believe in an organization, and here's the important part, that show up in the everyday behavior of the people. So when you look at how people behave in an organization, and their behavior is driven by the values that they hold. Sometimes, most companies talk about values, and they have these beautiful prints on their walls about integrity and excellence and quality and respect and all these other great things.
Yeah.
And then you look at their people and you say, well, sure doesn't look like that to me. And so the real culture of an organization is evidenced by their behavior, not by what's written on the walls. And really my work is organized around how do you make the connection between the two? How do you take those values that you said were important and drive them through your organization in such a way that they show up in the everyday behavior of the people, that they're real and they're alive in your organization.
Now, you've been doing this for, I think, over 20 or 30 years, is it?
Well, I ran a company for 27 years.
Right.
And so all of the things that I talk about and that I teach and that I write about are things that I did in my company.
Okay.
And so I spent 27 years doing them in my company, and after I sold my company and left that industry, then I wrote my book to teach others all the things that I learned and taught.
Okay, so then with that amount of time then, and you've been going through the different organizations, do you find that a lot of the organizations then do not have that organizational culture then that you talk about? Or do a lot of organizations do have it, but they don't know how to implement it?
The way I would say that every organization has a distinct culture. So the real issue is the culture what you want it to be, and are you leveraging it as a competitive advantage? Because when you really understand culture, you understand that this isn't like a touchy-feely HR topic. This is a competitive advantage that can be leveraged. And in my experience, very few companies have leveraged that. In most organizations, the culture sort of develops in a kind of accidental way. The owners of the company, the leaders of the company are not authoring and driving culture the way they want it to. They're just sort of allowing it to evolve however it evolves. And that's just a huge mistake.
So then how can a company or employer then implement it and motivate their employees to better themselves and the company?
Well, the key to that, Joe, is what I call the 8 steps to institutionalizing values. And when I use that phrase, institutionalizing values, what I'm talking about is the effort to take the values that we said are important to the leadership and drive them deep into the organization. And there are 8 key steps that I talk about in my book for how you do that. And real quickly, those 8 key steps are, the first step is defining the values, because if you're not clear about exactly what are the values you want to drive, well then how the heck are you going to do it?
Right.
So the first step is how do you define them really clearly and in behavioral terms. And I teach people how to do that effectively. The second step, once you've defined them clearly, is to begin recruiting people that are a great fit for your organization. And so we've got to select the right people to be on the team, and we talk about how to do that. Once we've recruited the right people, step 3 is all about integrating them into your organization. It's what some companies call orientation, or the new age term these days is onboarding. I don't really like that phrase, but it's the same concept. How do you take new people and get them into your organization in a way that they're up and running really effectively? So that's step 3. The fourth step is all about all the different ways that you make your values visible through the organization, in signs and on your website and cards and mouse pads and t-shirts, all the different ways that you can do that. And when I always talk about that, I say that it's important to make your values visible. The fact that they're visible doesn't make them real, but if they're really important to you, it's going to be a lot easier to talk about them all the time if they're surrounding you. So it is important to do. So the first step was defining. Second step was to recruit the right people. The third step is to integrate them into your organization. The fourth step is to make them visible. The fifth step is probably the most important in creating the connection between values and behavior, and that's what I call creating rituals. And we'll talk more about how do you create rituals that connect people on a regular basis to values. But that's step 5. Step 6 is about coaching and how you use the language of your values as you coach people on a day-to-day basis. Step 7 is all about the leadership example. How do you recognize that as a leader, you're setting the example and people are looking at you, whether you know it or not, or whether you want it or not, people are looking at you and they're taking their cue about the real values from your behavior. So no matter what you say, your behavior is the real demonstration of the values in the organization. And the last step is what I call creating accountability. There are different ways that you say, here's where we really mean it. For example, is it part of your performance reviews? Well, if values are important, they should certainly be part of your performance reviews. Or do you do surveys to hold yourselves accountable to the world about your behavior? So that's the 8th step. So there are these 8 steps that we look at for how you create a really intentional culture. And when you work through those in a methodical kind of programmatic way, you create that connection between this sort of highfalutin idea of values and everyday behavior. So it really is a living, breathing part of your organization.
Now, how have you discovered these 8 values as owning a company yourself for 27 years and implementing these, and no other, or say most other companies haven't even figured this out yet?
Well, it's just the way I think. So much of what I did in my career, I did in a very sort of natural, intuitive way. It just sort of made sense to me as the right way to treat people, the right way to treat customers, the right way to build an organization. And I should say, perhaps by way of background, that my background was I went to the College of William and Mary in Virginia, and I was a philosophy major. And I say that because I had no formal business education. And when I got out of school, the first job I ever had was my company that I started with my father. And so I had no other previous experience in other companies. And when I talk about that, I always say that lack of formal business training and previous experience in other companies is sort of like an advantage and a disadvantage. The disadvantage is I didn't have any training.
Right.
The advantage was I didn't have any training. So at every step of the way, I just did what made sense to me. That just seemed like the right way to do things. And I wasn't saddled with traditional notions of how things are normally done in other companies. So I didn't know that I was doing things that were unusual. They just worked. And so I was doing these things all along the way, and so many people who interacted with my company, customers, vendors, and others, they would realize there is something different going on in that company. Those people are drinking Kool-Aid or something. And so they could tell it was different. And they would ask me, how do you do this? And could you maybe talk to our leadership team? And so over time, I started to talk to leadership teams and do seminars on things that we were doing. Again, all of which I sort of discovered in a very natural kind of way, but perhaps my philosophical nature caused me to kind of step back and say, wow, that worked pretty well. What was it that I was doing maybe naturally? And what can I discern from that about human behavior, about organizational dynamics, about how to build a really cohesive team? And can I discern underlying principles that I could then write down and teach to other people? So again, it happened naturally, but then I was thoughtful and reflective about what was I doing so that when I sat down to really teach others and to write my book ultimately, I just thought about, well, what was it that I did? I didn't do them in that programmatic way. I was doing them anyway. But if you're going to teach other people, you have to give them some kind of a framework for those things. And that's what I really created with my book.
David Friedman, who we are talking with, his website, you can find him at djfriedman.com. That's Friedman. Maybe it's Friedman. How do you say your last name?
It's Friedman.
Oh,
You're
Friedman.
right.
Oh, okay. But it's spelled out Friedman. So make
Yes.
sure you do that. It's djfriedman.com. So how we're talking about this with the 8-step process then, it's kind of sounding more like to me then, David, that it's an ongoing thing. It doesn't just happen overnight. It's a long process, and it will make productivity in a company last long if it's ongoing, correct?
That's absolutely right, Joe. It's a long-term commitment. And again, great leaders understand that you have to apply to building your culture is something that, again, is a significant competitive advantage. And when you get that and you understand how important it is, you realize that you have to apply the same kind of rigor and discipline to that you do to sales or marketing or finance or strategy or any other part of your company. This is not a place, those who are less successful kind of put culture in the basket of HR.
Right.
This is just, they think of this, that's just an HR thing to make our people feel good. That's not a real business issue. Real business is about marketing and sales and finance. And this is just the touchy-feely stuff that the HR people have to worry about. Great companies understand, no, this is a competitive advantage. And that no matter how great your company is in terms of its strategy, if it's totally dysfunctional because your people don't work well together, your strategy is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. And so creating a really highly functioning company, again, my experience is it's the single most important thing that leads to success. And so it does require a significant long-term commitment and a discipline to really focus on these things.
And these 8 steps that we mentioned about briefly is in your book, Fundamentally Different. And you have a copy of it so we can see what it looks like there, David.
Sure.
And we can show the audience. It can be bought on Amazon or also can be seen on your website, correct?
That's correct. And it is on Amazon. It's available in both hard and soft cover, as well as in ebook for those that read on their Kindles or their iPads. And I've also recorded the audio version of it.
Nice.
So for those that prefer to listen, you can order the audio version.
Beautiful. Now, Fundamentally Different, again, by David Friedman, talks about the 8 key steps that we just kind of touched upon. And you also talk about a few other different things about listening, which more or less in this kind of business too, even in the entertainment business, being a talk show host, I have to listen to you and not speak so I can hear what the next question will be and build upon. And that is an importance. But for some people who don't get it, why is listening more important than speaking? And trust me, I know from a fact, I speak before I think, never mind listen. So why is listening more important, Dave?
Well, let me just kind of put that into some context as I answer that question for you, Joe.
Okay.
So the reason the book is called Fundamentally Different is that there are 30 values and behaviors that I taught in my company that I felt were fundamental to our success, and those were called collectively our fundamentals. And they're broken up into there are 30 of them.
Yeah.
And we practice these every week, and these were just really living, breathing parts of how we operated. And those 30 are broken down to 4 groupings. So the listening part is one of them, so I'll kind of put that in that context.
All
so
right.
the 4 groupings, the first 10 are what we call our core values. And those are things like doing what's best for the client, practicing what I call A+ness as a way of life, checking the ego at the door, things like that. And those were our core values. The next 7 of our fundamentals were what I call a focus on service, because all of them have to do in some way with delivering fabulous service. Those are things like practicing what I call the human touch, or another of them that was really important is to create a feeling of friendliness and warmth in every client interaction. So there were 7 of them that had to do with customer service.
Right.
The next 5 were what we called the collaborative way. And the collaborative way is a series of communication tools that help us to work together in very powerful ways. So those were things like speaking straight, or the one you're referring to, listening generously.
Right.
And then the last 8 were what I call personal effectiveness. And these were all, they didn't have to do so much with customer service as much as they had to do with how to be a really effective individual. So those were things like being organized or taking responsibility, or the last one of my favorites, is to learn to be, what I say, quick to ask and slow to judge. And it's all about learning to really understand the larger picture of something before you jump to conclusions. Yeah. So there were these 30 fundamentals that we practiced. So within the collaborative way, one of those was the question you asked, listening generously. Where does that come from and what does that mean? Well, listening generously is more than just simply shutting up so you can give the other person a chance to speak. Right. That's just like not talking. That's not really listening. Listening generously is really about, can I set aside all of the preconceived notions, what we call them filters, that I have in my brain, and just shut down all that noise and not assume I know what you're going to say, but just truly, deeply pay attention to what's coming out of your mouth and making sure that I really understand it, and most importantly, listening for the most positive interpretation I can get, for the greatest contribution that I can get from what you have to say. And when I learn to really listen that way, I open up for the opportunity for others to connect with me in ways that are very, very powerful. And again, ultimately influence action far more than when I'm just yapping. It's a very powerful tool.
And it seems to be, it sounds easier said than done. And how can one actually learn then to do that and be such a good listener, as we would call it?
Well, it takes a lot. You're right. It is. All of these are easier said than done, and they take a lot of practice because it's a skill no different than any other skill. You know, when you learn to play the piano, you don't become a master pianist on the first day. Well, listening is a skill set, and it takes a lot of practice to really work at it. I mean, one of the most important elements, so to give you just a snapshot, one of the most important elements of learning to be a good listener is learning to quiet your mind. That as we listen typically, usually we have voices going on in our head. You know, as I listen to you, typically my brain is saying, well, again, I know Joe, I know what his attitude is, so I already think I know what he's going to say. Right. That's one thing that goes through my head. Another is that often we're listening not to really understand, but to respond. That as I listen to you, I'm thinking in my brain, okay, how will I respond to what Joe is saying right now, versus just quieting that down and really deeply trying to pay attention. And so much of learning to be a good listener, an effective listener, and a generous listener, which is different than just a good listener, a generous listener, is to really quiet things down in our head, to get those voices to just silence and put them on the shelf. And now let me, with a clean slate, really deeply listen to what you're saying.
Okay, so that's fundamentally different, and that's with the part of the 30, what are they called again, 30? 30 steps?
Fundamentals.
Oh, 30 fundamentals, all right. And listening is in there. Now, but we talked about 8 keys. You got 30 fundamentals, but now there's also 5 components of good decisions. So we got 8, 30, and 5. Now, what are the 5 components of good decisions?
Well, just to, again, put this in context. So the 8 key steps to institutionalize whatever your values are. And every organization should have its own set of values, and you use this framework of these 8 steps to drive your values through your organization. The 30 fundamentals happen to be my values, and they don't have to be yours or any readers or listeners' values. They happen to be the ones in my organization, and so I wrote about them, not to be prescriptive and say every organization should take on these values, but they happen to be the ones in my organization, and many people, as they read the book, whether they are business people or not, they read those 30 fundamentals and they say, wow, this is really useful stuff for me in my life. Who cares if I lead a company or not? These are just, listening generally is a powerful tool in your relationships and your friendships and wherever you are. So these 30 fundamentals are the values that were in my organization. Now, one of those fundamentals, I talk about how to really think clearly, and that fundamental is all, the way it's phrased is that the quality of your answers is directly related to the quality of your questions. And it's really all about learning to be thoughtful and organize. What is it you're looking for? And part of that is about being a good decision maker. And part of being a good decision maker is learning to first identify, okay, what information is missing in a situation that if I knew this, the picture would be really clear. And so the first step in making great decisions is really to understand what you're looking for.
Right.
Once we understand what we're looking for, then it's a question of identifying each of the identifying each of the possible solutions to my problem. So there's a set of different solutions that each one of them has advantages and disadvantages. So I identify the solution set. Then I identify, so what are the advantages and disadvantages of each of those approaches? And then ultimately make a decision about which approach has the highest probability of leading to success. Now, one of the things that so many people make a mistake about, in my experience, about decision making, is that they define a good decision as one that worked out. When in fact, a good decision is really a process issue. It's about, did you choose the one that has the highest probability of success? So let me give you a quick example. If I were investing in a stock, and I was looking at two stocks, and I did all this analysis to decide which one had the highest probability of increasing in value. And I chose to invest in the one that had the highest probability. And unbeknownst to me, the next week, the CEO of the company resigns in a scandal and the whole stock dives.
Right.
Was that a poor decision? I would say no.
No, at that time, no.
If it was a thoughtful process and the highest probability of success, it was a good decision. And conversely, if I chose a lousy stock with a poor process and somehow just through good fortune and luck, it skyrockets, that doesn't make it a good decision.
No.
That's called luck.
Yes.
So a good decision is about evaluating options and choosing the option that has the highest probability of success.
It seems like a very lengthy process with all that you do and your team does to help out these organizations. How long, like when these organizations and companies contact you, how long do you work with them? And let's go on that first, and I got my follow-up question in a minute.
Okay. The answer to that, Joe, is that I hate to answer this with a depends, but it really depends.
Right.
And so much depends on where are they now, how functional or dysfunctional are they, and what's the commitment of the leader? Because everything starts, culture is driven by the leader of an organization. If you have a leader who really isn't about change and growth, you're nowhere. You can't start at the HR level. It's got to start at the top.
Right.
So I'm working with this company that I was referring to before we started. There's a company that I'm doing some consulting with that is a snow removal company. And the CEO of the company is a sharp guy. There's some problems in his culture, but he's a guy that understands that, I got to change. I got to be different if we're going to be successful. And so we can make significant changes there. To answer your question, how long? Within 6 to 12 months, we'll see big changes. Within 2 to 3 years, we'll see magnificent changes. But it's because we have a CEO who's invested in making changes.
Right. Now, have you ever had, and we won't name any names, we'll just call them companies. Have you ever had any companies who weren't willing to, they've asked for your help, but they weren't willing to do it? And what is the most dysfunctional company, not by name, that have you seen in the structure?
Well, I'll answer the second part first. In my previous business life, when running my business was an employee benefits consulting company. And so our customers were employers. So I was seeing employers all the time. And I saw a ton of dysfunctional ones, a lot. And I said before that the culture of an organization always follows its leadership. And so it was very consistent. If you have a leader who's a pretty good guy or a pretty good woman, they'll generally surround themselves with decent people. They may not leverage their culture to the extent that they could, but it's not going to be a bad culture. If you have a company, however, that's led by a CEO who is cynical, who's convinced that the whole world's out to cheat you, that you can never trust anybody, and there are people like that, and you know them as well,
right.
They surround themselves with negative people. And then those people are they're just sour, and it's dysfunctional. It just doesn't work. People are afraid to speak up in the organization. The whole thing does not work, and I've seen a lot of them.
Oh, jeez. David,
so it's bad.
David Friedman is the gentleman that we're speaking with. He wrote his new book, Fundamentally Different. It can be found on his website, djfriedman.com, or on Amazon. David, just show your book one more time so people can see what they're looking for. Unfortunately, we are kind of running out of time, but we would love to have you on again anytime, and we wish you all the luck and success. I know you're doing well of helping out companies, and hopefully if you out there have a company or you're in a company that you think may need help, you can contact David, djfriedman.com. David, I want to thank you very much for taking your time, for being with us here on Entertainment Extra with Joe Crawford on Remix TV.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, Joe. You have a great day today.
All right, thanks. You too. Stick around because we have a lot of shows here on remixtv.com. For Entertainment Extra, I'm Joe Crawford.